Like and subscribe to PalsFundamentals on YouTube for more videos like this. Sources are linked below. All right, so today we're doing something a little different. We're bringing you a regional news report zeroing in on the latest political and economic happenings across the North Atlantic.
Sounds interesting.
It is, actually, and we've got a lot of ground to cover, from Greenland to Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and all the way to the Shetland Islands.
Quite a spread.
It is, and our goal here, is pretty simple. We're just laying out the facts, sticking to what our sources tell us, no opinions, no speculation, none of that.
Just the news. Got it.
Yep, just the news. Straight and to the point. So, let's dive right in, shall we?
Where do we start?
Well, how about Greenland? We've got some interesting developments in local governance. In Havana Communia, there's a brand new coalition in the municipal council.
A new coalition, huh? Who are the players?
It's Simutit and Nalarak. And this means Lars Erik Gabrielsen, he's from Simutit, is stepping in as the new mayor.
Makes sense, right? Siemet was the biggest party in the elections.
Exactly. And Jens Napatok, he's from Nalarak, is taking on the first vice mayor position. Interesting dynamic there, right?
Yeah, I mean, Siemet's got the majority, but Nalarak still snags a key position.
You got it. And there's more. They're setting up a new tourism committee. So thinking about what this all means, I'm curious, what kind of impact could this coalition have?
Well, with Siemut holding most of the cards, it's pretty likely their agenda will be front and center, right? But having Nalarak in the mix suggests, some common ground, some agreement on major issues.
A bit of compromise, makes sense.
And setting up a new tourism committee, that's definitely sending a signal. It says economic development, specifically in tourism, is high on their list of priorities, at least within the municipality.
Makes you think what kind of projects they'll be focusing on. Now, on a bigger scale, we've got to talk about Greenland and its relationship with the U.S., right? That whole thing's still making waves. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen of Denmark, she visited Nuuk recently, and let me tell you, she made it crystal clear. Annexation is off the table.
Direct response to the U.S. interests, huh? Didn't hold back.
Not at all. But she did make a point of highlighting the strong, long-standing cooperation with the U.S., especially when it comes to that military base and potential trade deals. But she held firm. Greenland's not for sale, she said. Pretty powerful statement, if you ask me.
Absolutely. Shows the delicate balance they're trying to maintain. And remember, Jens Fredrik Nielsen, he also stressed the importance of open and respectful dialogue with the U.S. in all of these discussions.
Diplomacy is key, right?
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears to the U.S. side of things, Marco Rubio, what's his take on all this?
Well, he's all about respecting Greenland's right to choose its own path. He's basically saying the desire to break away from Denmark, that's coming from within Greenland, not something the U.S. is pushing.
Interesting take. So he's basically dismissing that whole narrative that the U.S. is the one stirring the pot.
Right, but he does bring up another concern, the potential for Chinese influence in the region. That's something you hear a lot in these conversations.
Makes sense. Strategically, Greenland's location is pretty important. And then there's J.D. Vance. What's he adding to the mix?
He's doubling down on U.S. national security interests in Greenland, suggests maybe the U.S. should step up its financial support. Goes on to say he believes Greenlanders are pretty clear about wanting independence from Denmark. Even mentions a number, a pretty big one, for how much Denmark sends to Greenland annually.
Oh, wow. Wonder what that number is exactly. But yeah, that definitely highlights the economic ties, no question. Now, switching gears to NATO, what are they saying? I mean, all this has to be on their radar, right?
Absolutely. Secretary General Mark Rutte, he mentioned that Arctic security might come up at a NATO meeting. Not specifically Greenland, but the whole Arctic region.
So while Greenland's political status might not be the main course at NATO, the bigger security picture of the Arctic, which includes Greenland, that's definitely on the menu.
Exactly. He brought up some of the broader concerns, involving several Arctic nations, things like those important sea lanes, and of course, Russia's growing military presence in the region. Oh, and he also mentioned something interesting, the limited number of icebreakers available. Seems like that could be a problem.
I can see how that would be an issue, especially with all the increased activity up north. Now, we've got Lars Løkke Rasmussen, a big name in Danish politics, weighing in. He's suggesting a way forward for Greenland, saying they could take on more responsibility in certain policy areas.
And he's pointing back to the 2009 Self-Governance Act, which already lays out a framework for this. His idea is basically a gradual transfer of power with continued financial support from Denmark. Of course, he's careful to say this is his party's view, not necessarily the government's. But he makes a valid point. Only a handful of sectors have actually been handed over to Greenland since 2009.
And he's saying that's mainly due to Greenland's financial situation, right?
Right.
So what are the key areas that are still under Danish control?
Well, the 2009 Act, it outlines about 30 policy areas. The big ones that haven't been transferred, those are foreign policy, security and defense, and the judicial system. Rasmussen's point is a step-by-step approach with Denmark backing them financially that could really empower Greenland in areas where they're ready to take the reins.
Makes sense. Now, Greenland's got a brand new coalition government, and they've been pretty vocal about their plans.
Yeah, they're aiming to ramp up self-governance big time, want to see more responsibility transferred from Denmark. And they've got specific plans like revising the Self-Governance Act and pushing for economic growth through investments.
Sounds like they're not messing around.
Definitely not. But then we've got Lars Trier Mogensen. He's a political commentator offering a different perspective. He's saying full equality within the Danish realm, that's probably a pipe dream.
Why is that?
He points to the Danish constitution, which basically says Copenhagen, they're in control of foreign and security policy, period. And he just doesn't see Denmark giving that up anytime soon. It's way too geopolitically important.
Right, that makes sense.
He does see potential for Greenland to gain more control in one area, though, trade policy. He compares it to what the Faroe Islands are doing, trying to join the WTO.
That's an interesting parallel. Now, one thing that caught my eye, the Department for Independence, it's MIA in the new government's proposed structure. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, it looks like having a dedicated department just for independence, that might be going by the wayside. But Vivian Matsfeldt, she was the head of that department and is now slated to be Foreign Affairs Minister, she says, the work towards independence. Specifically, what's outlined in paragraph 21 of the Self-Governance Act, that's still going strong, just through a commission now. So the goal hasn't changed, just the way they're organized.
Makes sense. It's all about strategy, right? Now let's zoom back in on local politics. Inuit Ataqatigiit, IA, they pulled out of coalition talks in Commune Kukertalik. Talks with Siumut just weren't going anywhere. And this is a big deal because traditionally this municipality has been an IA stronghold.
Yeah, and in the last election, Siumut became the top dog there, and IA saw their votes drop significantly. Hard to say for sure what led to the shakeup without knowing the specifics of those negotiations, but the election results, they're painting a clear picture. Voters in Kukertalik, they're looking for something different.
Changing tides, it seems. Now, last but not least for Greenland, we got to talk about the economy. All those U.S. tariffs, what's the impact looking like?
From what we're seeing, not as big as some might expect. It all boils down to how much Greenland actually exports directly to the U.S., and it's not a lot. Greenland business, they've been pretty upfront. Their direct interaction with the U.S. market is minimal. They often get better prices elsewhere. And if you look at the numbers, it backs that up. In 2024, their total fish product exports through Denmark were massive, but only a tiny fraction went to the U.S.
So their economic lifeline, it's more tied to places like China and the EU. Makes you think about global trade and all its complexities. All right, enough about Greenland for now. Let's hop over to Iceland.
And let's be honest, the news there has been dominated by Mother Nature lately, all that volcanic activity.
Can't escape it, can you?
Not really. So what's the latest? We're hearing about land rising again at Svartsengi. What's that all about?
Well, that's a sign, a pretty clear one, that magma is still building up beneath the surface in that area. It's likely connected to that recent magma intrusion, the one everyone's been talking about. But to get a real handle on how fast this accumulation's happening, it's going to take some time. Maybe a week even.
So still a bit of a waiting game, huh?
Yep.
And all that activity across the Reykjanes Peninsula, that hasn't stopped completely, has it?
Nope. Still picking up deformation readings in the northern part of the magma dike. That includes spots like Vogar and Keilir. And there's been some minor movement, fractures shifting a bit in eastern Grindavik. Microearthquakes, those are popping up near Trollhättan. But around the main magma dike itself, things have actually calmed down a bit. So like a simmering pot, not quite boiling over, but you know it's still hot.
Good analogy.
Now, that eruption near Horbjorn, the one that kicked off everything, that's officially over, right?
It is, officially. And there's always a but with volcanoes, isn't there?
Seems like it.
Small earthquakes, those are still rumbling in the northern part of that magma intrusion. And we have to remember, this was a big one. 8th eruption in the Simnukar crater row, 11th, since this whole new volcanic period got going, and that recent magma intrusion, the one that fed the eruption, that was the second longest we've seen since November 2023.
So it's not over till it's over, I guess, when it comes to volcanoes. And speaking of, we heard something about the magma flow decreasing. What's the significance of that?
Well, that decrease in flow, it's coming from beneath Svartsengi heading into the Sundhnúkar crater row, and that's what finally put a stop to the land subsidence we were seeing. It's basically a shift in the dynamics of the whole magma system down there. And just to add to that, the northernmost part of this intrusion, it stretches pretty far, almost 4 kilometers north of Keilir.
Wow, that's a considerable distance. So the ground beneath our feet is a lot more dynamic than we sometimes realize. Now, shifting gears completely, let's talk about a serious legal case in Iceland. The main proceedings have just wrapped up in a very sensitive case. It involves a miner who's been charged with murder and attempted murders.
This was during Culture Night last year, a truly tragic event.
Absolutely. And we're expecting a verdict soon.
Yes, within the next 4 weeks. The whole trial was kept under wraps, behind closed doors. Understandably so, considering the ages of everyone involved. The defense is pushing back against the maximum sentence for a minor, which is 8 years. And the prosecution, they're seeking sentencing and payment for all the legal costs.
It's a heavy situation, no doubt about it. And unfortunately, there's another serious crime that made headlines. A man's been charged with attempted murder after a brutal stabbing in Akureyri.
This happened during Merchants Weekend earlier this year. The victim was stabbed multiple times, life-threatening injuries. He's now seeking a substantial amount in damages.
4 million ISK, I believe.
Yes, that's right. A preliminary hearing is scheduled for the end of the month.
It's a reminder that even in a place like Iceland, these kinds of violent crimes can happen. Now let's pivot to politics. There's been a lot of talk about Ásthildur Lóa Þórsdóttir resigning as Minister of Education and Children. What's the public's take on all this?
Well, a recent poll showed that a vast majority, 74%, believe she made the right call stepping down. This all stems from reports connected to a personal matter from many years ago.
I remember that. It involved a relationship that started when she was much younger.
Right, but here's the interesting part. That same poll revealed that 70% don't think she should resign from Parliament. And over half felt the media coverage was a bit over the top, unfair even.
So, it's complicated. People recognize the seriousness of the situation, but they also seem to separate that from her role as an elected representative.
That's the sense I got, too. It's a nuanced perspective. Now, there's another issue brewing in Icelandic politics, something that's putting pressure on the government.
What's that?
NATO. They're pushing for Iceland to up its defense spending.
Makes sense, in a way, with all the global tensions.
Yeah.
But Iceland doesn't have a standing army, right? How are they dealing with this pressure?
It's definitely a challenge. Þórgerður Katrín, she's been pretty vocal about this, saying the pressure's real. And it's not just NATO. Iceland's also been invited to join the EU's Rearm Europe initiative. That program, it's all about boosting defense spending, not just for EU members, but also for some EFTA countries, like Iceland.
So they're getting it from both sides. It seems like the expectation is there for Iceland to step up its game when it comes to collective security. And how are they responding?
Well, they're looking to strengthen their partnerships. They're talking about deepening cooperation with the EU, Norway, and the UK, specifically through the Joint Expeditionary Force.
Makes sense. Strengthen numbers.
Exactly. And they're also looking to reinforce ties with Canada, all with the goal of shoring up security in the North Atlantic and Arctic regions.
So finding ways to contribute without necessarily having a large military of their own. Now, let's wrap up Iceland with some news from law enforcement. There's been a major drug bust at Keflavik Airport.
A big one. Customs officers got their hands on a massive shipment of OxyContin, the high-strength stuff. We're talking thousands of tablets, street value. Astronomical. Over 100 million ISK.
Wow, that's alarming.
It is, and it highlights a growing problem. Police in Suðuroyartunnilin, they're saying their cells are practically overflowing with people caught smuggling drugs, and a bunch of people are currently behind bars because of these recent incidents at the airport.
I remember reading about Iceland having a record number of drug-related deaths last year. Is there a connection?
Unfortunately, yes. Over 60% of those deaths were linked to opioids. And OxyContin, it's a big part of the problem. Highly addictive. It's scary stuff.
No doubt.
And the routes these drugs are taking, they're pretty complex. Starting in South America, then often passing through other European countries before they land in Iceland.
A global issue with local consequences. Okay, let's shift our focus now to the Faroe Islands. I hear there's been some controversy about ferry prices.
Yeah, there were some planned price hikes, and despite some pushback, they went into effect on April 8th.
Who's behind this?
Strandferðaskip Landsins, SSL, the National Ferry Company. The Minister of Transport, Johan Christensen, he explained that SSL's budget got slashed 5 million kroner less than they asked for. So to make up for that shortfall, they had to raise prices.
I could see how that would be a tough decision. But didn't the tourism industry voice some concerns? Weren't they worried about the short notice?
They were, yeah, but the government held firm. They said the budgetary situation, it just wouldn't allow for any delays.
So a tough call, but they went ahead with it. Now, there's another issue that's been generating a lot of discussion in the Faroes, this proposed Suðuroyartunnil project. It's a massive undertaking. And Landsbanken, the national bank, they've released some analysis. What's their take?
They're not sugarcoating it. Their numbers show that this tunnel, estimated to cost 5 billion kroners, including all the interest, is a huge financial risk for the Faroes. They're basically saying the islands can't afford it without hitting taxes and welfare programs hard. Malin Johansson, she's the director of Landsbanken, she put it bluntly. There's just no financial wiggle room for this project right now.
So they're sounding the alarm. And I heard Prime Minister Axel V. Johannesson, he held a special meeting for members of parliament all about this tunnel. What happened there?
It was a chance to really dig into this project. I mean, it's the biggest infrastructure project the Faroes have ever seen. And what's interesting is both the Suðuroy Tunnel Company and a private tunnel group, they were both there debating the whole thing.
So it's not just about whether they can afford it, but also about the best way to go about it.
Exactly. And the private group, they're advocating for a pause, saying, hold on, let's really examine all the options before we commit to this specific plan. They're suggesting a different route, one that goes via Skúvoy, which would actually be longer. But they think it could be finished 2 years faster because they could drill from 3 different spots at the same time.
That's a pretty compelling argument.
Yeah.
So it's a big decision, lots of factors to weigh. And the Economic Council, what's their stance on all this?
They're singing the same tune as Landsbanken, saying, pump the brakes on the Suðuroy tunnel, at least for now. The Faroes economy, it's just not in a place to handle a project of this magnitude right now. The Prime Minister, he's still a believer. He sees this tunnel as a crucial investment, something that will pay off for generations.
A 50 to 60-year investment, he said.
Right. But even he admits that if they start digging now, other important projects like that new patrol and rescue ship and a bunch of other planned tunnels, those are going to have to be put on hold.
Tough choices all around. All right, let's move on to social policy in the Faroes. There's been a new development on the abortion front. The Framsókn party, they've taken a new stance. Fill us in.
So their party board has adopted a new policy, and it basically says a woman should have the final say on whether to have an abortion up to the 12th week of pregnancy.
That's a pretty clear position.
It is, and it's a noticeable change, especially considering the divisions within their own parliamentary group last year when they were voting on changes to the abortion law. Ruth Vang, she's the party chairwoman. She doesn't think the abortion bill is coming back to parliament anytime soon, though. So the impact of this new policy, it might be more symbolic for now.
Interesting development for sure. Now, switching gears to international travel, it seems like things are picking up for the Faroes. A few foreign airlines are coming back.
That's right. Widery and SAS, they're back in the air, flying to the Faroe Islands. And Icelandair, they're set to restart flights next week. The director of Vaga Airport, Regina Furs Jacobsen, he's pretty optimistic. Bookings are looking good, and expectations for the summer tourism season are high.
That's great news for the Faroes economy.
It is. And the airport, they've got a bigger goal. They want those foreign airlines to operate year-round. But there's a catch. Widerøe and Icelandair, they don't currently use the RNP system.
RNP, that's the Required Navigation Performance System, right?
You got it. SAS and Atlantsflog, they use it. It allows them to land even when the weather's not so great. So Widerøe, they're thinking about year-round flights, but only if they can get their hands on planes equipped with RNP.
So it's a bit of a wait-and-see situation. Now let's end our Faroes coverage on a high note. I heard there was some exciting news in the world of sports.
Oh, yeah. A Faroe Islands women's national football team. They had a great showing in the Nations League. They beat Moldova 2-0, which puts them in second place in their group. They'll be facing Gibraltar next on their home turf.
That's fantastic. Good for them. Now, before we move on, one last bit of news from the Faroes. It's about those new tariffs that were implemented. Seems like they're having an impact, a negative one, on people's pensions.
Unfortunately, that's true. Arnfinnur Gudjonsson, he's an investment manager at Liv. They handle a big chunk of Faroes' pensions. He confirmed that pensions have taken a hit. And he's blaming those tariffs, saying they've created a lot of uncertainty in the global stock markets, which has a ripple effect on pension fund investments.
So global trade policies, they're hitting people right in their wallets.
It's a real-world consequence.
All right, let's shift our attention now to the Shetland Islands, part of Scotland, UK. And there's a big issue brewing there in the fishing industry.
The Shetland Fishermen's Association, they're not mincing words. They're calling out what they see as a ban everything mentality, especially when it comes to the government's plans for all these offshore wind farms.
Those wind farms are part of the push to reach net zero targets, right?
Exactly. But the fishermen, they're worried these farms will end up squeezing them out of their traditional fishing grounds. They're calling it a spatial squeeze. And it's not just the wind farms. There are increasing restrictions in conservation areas, too. The association says by 2050, trawlers could be banned from fishing in more than half of Scottish waters.
That's a huge chunk of their territory.
It is. And they're making a point that while the UK is pushing for these green initiatives, some of the biggest polluters out there, they're actually increasing their emissions. It's a double standard, they say. UHI Shetland, they've also raised concerns about potential damage to fish habitats from salmon farms expanding and all the cables that need to be laid for these onshore wind and energy projects. The fishing industry, they feel like they're constantly under attack.
I can see why they'd be frustrated. They're trying to make a living, and they feel like their voices aren't being heard.
Exactly. And the Shetland Fishermen's Association, they're making a pretty strong argument. They say squeezing the fishing industry, which is already a relatively sustainable way to produce food, could actually backfire because if they can't catch fish here, those fish will have to come from somewhere else, and that might mean relying on more carbon-intensive methods.
So it's a complicated issue. No easy answers. Now let's switch gears to some positive news from Shetland. Tourism season is upon us.
It is. The 2025 cruise season kick off with the arrival of the Viking Vela in Lerwick. And that's just the first of over 140 cruise ships expected to visit this season. Lerwick Port Authority, they're predicting a bustling season, which is great news for the local economy.
And Lerwick's top cruise line, Viking Ocean Cruises, they've got a packed schedule.
21 calls this season, to be exact. And that first ship, the Viking Vela, it brought in almost 1,000 passengers, people from all over the world.
That's a lot of potential customers for local businesses.
Absolutely. And there's more good news on the tourism front. The tourist center in Lerwick, it's under new management, and there's a fundraising effort to give it a complete makeover. The Shetland Tourism Association, they're trying to raise £4,000 to make this happen.
That's great to hear. And Sunberg Lighthouse, another popular tourist spot that's reopened for the season too.
Yep, ready for visitors.
Lots to see and do in Shetland. Now, last but not least, we've got some news about transportation safety, specifically on those Northlink ferries. There have been some concerns raised. What's the story there?
Well, Shetland MSP Beatrice Wisher, she brought up some safety issues after a woman reported a pretty disturbing incident on a ferry. Apparently, she found a man standing over her teenage daughter, making gestures like he wanted to shoot her. This all happened in one of the pod lounges.
That's terrifying. I can't imagine how scared they must have been.
And Mrs. Wisher also mentioned previous incidents, expressing concerns about the safety of these pod lounges, especially compared to those old shared cabins that they used to have.
Right, because those were more private, weren't they?
Exactly. So Northlink's managing director, Stuart Garrett, he responded to these concerns, saying passenger safety is their #1 priority. He pointed out that the pod lounges are monitored by CCTV and that they have security personnel on all overnight sailings. He also encouraged passengers to report any bad behavior, warning that anyone causing trouble will be banned from the ferries.
That's good to hear. They're taking it seriously. Did Ms. Wishart raise any other issues?
Yeah, she questioned why they got rid of the shared cabins. She believes it limits accommodation options and pushes prices up. And she also brought up the cliff edge booking system, asking about a rolling booking system for the next Northlink contract.
So basically wanting more flexibility and options for passengers.
Right. And Northlink, they said they don't plan to bring back shared cabins, but they are open to considering a rolling booking system.
So some progress, but not on every front. All right, that was a whirlwind tour of the North Atlantic. We covered a lot of ground, from local politics and economic challenges to volcanic activity and social issues. It's amazing how interconnected these regions are, even though they're geographically spread out.
It is. And we've only scratched the surface. There's always more to learn and explore. So if anything we've talked about today piqued your interest, I encourage you to dig deeper, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions.
Couldn't agree more. This has been a snapshot, a glimpse into the current state of affairs in these fascinating North Atlantic regions. And we'll be back with more deep dives into the events shaping our world. Thanks for joining us. Like and subscribe to PalsFundamentals on YouTube for more videos like this. Sources linked below. See you next time.